Welcome to Black Books Matter UK.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can
Yeah, I
you hear
can.
me okay, JT? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Fabulous.
How
Well,
are
thanks so
you?
much for talking. Yeah, I'm really, really, really good. I'm in a good mood. It's been super sunny where I am today. I don't know why.
Yes, same here.
Is it the same for you?
Yeah. Beautiful. Still a
Yeah.
little bit chilly, but gorgeous sunshine, which always fills me with hope. But
Yeah.
like we're on our way, and lots of blossoms. So it does feel very springtime when the blossoms are out. I love that.
Springtime. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
here. Spring is looming. I believe in it. Well, thank you so much for talking with Black Books Matter UK today. Super, super excited.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks ever so much.
I think I honestly, I just think the book is absolutely wonderful. There's so much going on in
Oh,
Portraits and Poisons. Like when you just flip through it, as soon as you open it, it's like, I just want to look at this bit. I want to look at this bit. But I think the first thing I'd love to really ask is we always really love exploring here at Black Books Matter different ways that you get into writing and the publishing industry as a whole. So it would be exciting about how you came to your author journey, as I know you were obviously also a primary school teacher, which is really,
yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'll be honest, I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was little. And I've still got all my sort of diaries. I've sort of kept, really detailed diaries for years and years, since about the age of about 11, I still have. Um, and different, it's like life is kind of busy, my kids, and I was working, and I didn't really know how I was going to make writing work. And so it's kind of like a series of steps, and the teaching, when I became a primary school teacher, my impetus for doing that, really, what pushed me to do that was really sort of wanting to be involved in the process of helping children to learn to read, and
Yeah.
really sort of wanting to be involved in sharing that joy that we get when we lose ourselves in a book and we feel like it could change our life, and all of that lovely stuff. And so I got involved with teaching. I became a primary school teacher. And then this kind of extra level of joy that came from that work was teaching writing, and that was just so much fun. And we'd start our literacy lessons every day, and then on a Friday the kids would do what we would call their sort of extended write, like their big write, and then I would take those books home on the weekend, and I would spend hours like reading them, marking them really carefully, giving them loads of feedback, kind of treating them like authors, like trying to give them like really authorial feedback, because it just genuinely filled me with such pride to read their work. And this was even like just year 3 kids, like age 7 and 8, and then later in year 6. Then I realized that in year 6 in particular, when we're starting to sort of do SATs and tests, the ways in which we're teaching reading and writing becomes a bit constricted. So I was like, how can we keep the joy? How can we keep the fun? And I worked in a really lovely school where we were taking the kids out on trips quite a lot for our topics. And I noticed whenever we went out of the classroom, the quality of my children's writing absolutely soared. So I started planning out a sort of new career path, which was to teach writing to school-aged children, but in museums and galleries, and with a focus on sort of, Black diaspora literature and experiences and exhibitions. And I started actually working, I'm thinking I probably, will have met other people in your team, because I started working at Africa Writes. I set up an education program for the Africa Writes Literature Festival. And I'm sure that Black Books Matter have been involved with Africa Writes in the past. So then I was inviting poets and other writers into classrooms to work with school groups and seeing sort of what work could be done there, encouraging young people to write their own poetry. So suddenly I was surrounded by writers. So again, kind of creeping closer and closer to this experience. And then finally, just before lockdown, I took a bit of a risk, but I just thought, if it's not now, it's never going to happen. So I left my job and I started sort of, doing workshops alone. But I started a creative writing course. I did a master's course and a PhD, which I'm on now. But the writing for children sort of happened really when I met Jasmine Richards at Story Mix. So
She's
she
so
came to,
cool.
she's just
Jasmine's
amazing. And
amazing.
yeah, she really is. And again, it was just like this sort of light bulb moment when we
Yeah.
met each other. I just knew that something was going to happen between us. And I was running a workshop for teachers about Ignatius Sancho and Una Marson and other figures from Black British history. And Jasmine came to this workshop, and this was in 2019. She said, you know, the Sancho guy, it sounds amazing. Like, I kind of got this idea, maybe like a mystery series set in his shop. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's really cool. So about 2 years later, we sort of found each other again, and she was like, would you be interested in writing that? And I was like, oh, that sounds really, really intriguing. So it kind of happened like that. So I love the fact that this book that is, you know, these books now that are about these two girls and their sort of partnership and how they work together was genuinely born out of a collaboration.
That's so cool.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, very long-winded answer. I'm sorry. I'm so wordy.
No, but no, that's a really, 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 that's a great story to share, because I think often it can, like, the publishing world or like writing can be quite, like, it can be quite demystified and stuff. Like, it's like very mystified and we want to demystify it.
Yeah,
There are ways like this where there are so many routes that you can go into it and stuff like that. So it's always really exciting hearing everyone's journey in, because they're always so different.
Definitely. And, you know, I know that, you know, Story Mix, I know that Jasmine would be very happy for me to say, you know, Story Mix, they're always looking for writers, basically, you know, Black and brown writers. If you're thinking about writing for children and thinking about writing stories that center Black and brown children, then, you know, do sort of have a look at the work that Story Mix is doing, because they really are kind of, you know, supporting new talent in really amazing ways. And yeah, they're doing fantastic work.
Yeah, she's great. When I started the charity, and I'm not from the publishing world background at all type thing. I'm a person who loves books.
Wow. Yeah.
And I sat down with her like online, and like she just gave me so much time and was like explaining how it all works, and was just so generous with her time and knowledge. So I'm a Jasmine Richards Story Mix fan.
Yeah, excellent. That's so lovely. It's like a kind of family. I kind of feel, you know, yeah. And we have to all work collectively, don't we? I mean, this is how this works. And I feel like, you know, we are really making amazing progress, I feel, over the past few years, actually, in particular. But we have to keep on. We have to really, really sort of keep on keeping at it. And we have to look after each other and support each other. And, you know, so yeah, another reason why I'm really grateful for these interviews. It's so lovely to be able to, you know, to talk about the books with people who really understand why I'm doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like something that we found as an organization when we're like trying to find these diverse books to like use, whether it's part of like the session plans that we work with teachers to kind of try and not only diversify the books they're using, but creative ways to, you know, implement books into the curriculum, or when we're using books for our creative writing sessions, it's trying to find that balance of like the times when it's historical books and about our story and about where we've come from, and then also those books which are just simply books and Black and brown kids can just kind of see themselves in. And I think the thing I found most thrilling about reading your book and like going on the adventures with Lizzie and Belle was just like how you balance out the learning side of it and the history and the context, but then still like the general fun, exciting detectives, like, you know, the curiosity, all the fun and the playful bits. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, how did you find those ways to create that balance throughout the writing process? And secondly, kind of a second part question, do you have any advice on discussing tips around slavery with young people? And obviously, you know, you come from a teaching background as well, because obviously a lot of people can often shy away from it.
Yes, yeah. I'm really glad you asked me, because I think it's a real challenge, right? And it's been a constant set of dilemmas, like thinking about striking the right tone, because I feel, as a history, it's a history I'm absolutely sort of fascinated by. And it's difficult and it's traumatic and it's complex. But I feel that if we don't confront it, there are so many other stories that we stand to lose. And therefore, we just sort of have to get involved with it. We just kind of got to get our hands dirty and face it in order to draw out all these ways in which people survived and thrived and lived and loved and managed to kind of navigate this really difficult and dangerous life as it often was. And in terms of sort of having those conversations with young people sort of through the text as well, I felt that, so for me, it's almost as though Lizzie and Belle are your sort of guides through the story. And what ended up happening was I felt that as Lizzie and Belle, this was where the sort of mystery genre came in really handy, because Lizzie and Belle are making these discoveries, right? Sort of, piece by piece as they go along. And they're confronted, especially in the first book, with adults who are trying to sometimes, pretend to hide who they really are, let's say, or to cover up their crimes. And it's up to Lizzie and Belle to question them, to sort of interrogate them, and to interrogate the evidence. And what they discover in the process of this kind of adventure and this journey is not just, the crime as it's been set up in terms of, who's made the attack on Ignacio Sancho at the beginning of the book, but it's also really the crime of slavery. And they're discovering, as young people living in that world, they're discovering more about the world in which they're living. And so I wanted to create space really for young readers to discover that, to make those discoveries as well, but in this kind of, in a space, in a space in which Lizzie and Belle can almost open up opportunities for that sort of moral response. Because I think that a lot of young people have a really strong sense of right and wrong, and a really strong sense of fairness and justice. And so it's difficult presenting them with terrible things that have been done to people. But I think if we also present them with the space to have their own moral response and really think through why it was wrong, really think through what it means to sort of take someone's freedom from them. So there are moments where Lizzie and Belle also will sort of have those conversations where they'll kind of talk it through, whether it's with family members or with each other, but just have those spaces for those responses. And what I'm hoping that those parts of the book can do is make those sort of safe spaces for readers to sort of navigate this history. But then, as you say, that also then trying to sort of balance it out so it doesn't just feel like a really heavy history lesson, because no one really necessarily sort of wants that or wants to feel that that's what's happening. So also just trying to sort of really sort of keep the pace up and keep the action up, so that, yes, you're just kind of moving with these characters through this really kind of pacey journey. But yeah, it's always a challenge, and I'm never always certain whether I'm really sort of hitting the right balance. But when I've been into schools and I'm hearing back from kids who've been reading the book, it feels as though hopefully we're kind of striking the right notes. And what I really feel very humbled by is actually how mature, young people are, and how ready they are, as right? Yeah. To really think about really complex issues and question them, and question the history that they've sort of been taught as well. And that, I think my ultimate aim is to really kind of foster that curiosity and really say to young readers, look, always sort of probe, always dig a bit deeper, always sort of try and go beneath the surface of what people are presenting to you as the story of how something happened, because the person telling you that story might have an agenda. They might have a reason for wanting you to believe it happened one way rather than another. But what can you do to unearth, something that's closer to a truth for you?
Yeah. No, I love that. That's sparking that curiosity. And we have what you were saying about kind of giving young people you're not only like, talking about history, but giving them the opportunity to kind of challenge and ask questions and reflect themselves. We do this exercise in one of our workshops called Book Detectives, which is like when I got sent this book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is I'm like, this is getting used in our workshop. There's no question about that. But like, we kind of like do it on paper first, then we explore like diversity and like a range of different book covers on paper, and then we give them the opportunity. And you know what, I wish it didn't, because it doesn't need to, but sometimes teachers then look terrified because they say, oh, we're going to take apart our bookshelves now and do it with our books.
Right.
And so then they do book detectives, but like in the classroom. And it's always that moment where I just like smile at the teacher, and it's like, we're not here to tell you off. That's not what we're doing. That's literally not what we're doing. But it's just like, and there's so many other things that come into that in terms of like funding with schools and all of that. Like, that's not what we're doing. We're just showing them how to be curious and to, look at the world around them. And I think the thing is with young people is that, when you can have a relation to something that is so tangible in their own space, that's when they really like understand concepts and stuff. So yeah, I think often teachers get like, oh no, we're gonna check our books, but it's just always really helpful for them to like see it, like
definitely
talk about it, and then talk about it.
And it's empowering for them, isn't it? Because you're giving them agency, right? It's kind of ways of, how can we make sure, because it is challenging in the class. And when I know this from my time as a teacher, there's so much to kind of fit in. And, ideally, what we know from our experiences and from research is that children learn best when they're kind of doing, when they're finding out for themselves, where they're talking to each other. What you don't want is a situation whereby they're just sitting in class listening to teachers kind of divulging information, right? So there are going to be parts of the lesson where that might happen, but those are not really the moments in which children are really going to be learning in any meaningful. To like, activate children's curiosity, to give them space to kind of to speak, to explore, to ask questions, to challenge, to probe. It's really, really important. And I think, the beauty of having like other organizations come into schools from the outside is that you come in with a completely different view, a different perspective, a different set of priorities. And it might kind of shake us up a bit, but that's good. That's what we need, right? You kind of need to be kind of shaken out of your habits sometimes in order to improve your own practice.
Yeah, completely. So this is my last question before our final three, which is like a little speedy round, which is super fun. So I
have to try and be a bit more succinct.
Last question as we start to come towards an end before our magic three is, so obviously Lizzie and Belle are based on Elizabeth Sancho and Dido Bell, who were real people living in Georgian England. So I think I'm really curious as to how you found that process of like pulling, whether it's context and character traits, pulling from real life, but then still, and history, but then still having that creativity of when creating those characters. And like, did you find that challenging as well? Like, how did you like play with that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was challenging, but I think it also sort of reaches a point where they sort of start to live as characters in your mind. So now I've reached a point after sort of writing two of these books where Lizzie and Belle, both completely, the characters of Lizzie and Belle, if you like, that I've created, completely exists for me in my mind as fully fleshed out people. And then if I sort of then take a step back and think about how I sort of drew on sort of, the real people for that sort of inspiration. So for Dido Bell, for me, it was like when I first saw her portrait, this really extraordinary portrait of this woman with a slightly sort of mischievous smile on her face, like pointing to her face as she's painted alongside her cousin. And that really did like spark a curiosity in me as to like who this woman was. I couldn't even believe it when I first saw her portrait in Kenwood House. But I think that was probably one of the first times really I'd seen like a sort of a Black Georgian woman pictured in this way. And then finding out about Lizzie Sancho, so when her father Ignatius writes his letters, the real life Ignatius writes letters, he talks so fondly and with such love and compassion about his family. And I just kind of thought, well, actually, these girls actually did live, you know, not that far from each other in London at the same time. And I was just really curious about this idea of sort of bringing them together. And
So
what
cool.
one thing that was really interesting, it's crazy, really, because, you know, on the one hand, it was like, that's an invention of mine. But then the more research I did, the more I realized that their families and their lives did seem to overlap, and so it just wouldn't really have been unthinkable, you know. So David Garrick, the actor and director in the first book, was a good friend of Sancho's, but also used to attend Sunday night dinners at Kenwood House, where he was invited to by Lord and Lady Mansfield. When I was doing a sort of walking research trip for the second book, so Ottobah Guano was you know, one of the sons of Africa who wrote his own sort of life story, lived in London. And I went to look at Thomas Gainsborough's house. So Thomas Gainsborough lived for a while on Pall Mall, as per the book, Portraits and Poison. Yeah. And when I found his house and saw a blue plaque there on the wall to Thomas Gainsborough, just opposite it, on the same wall, is another plaque to Ottobah Guano, who also lived in that house with the Causeway. So he worked for a couple called Richard, I can't remember, what is it, Mary? He worked for the Causeways, basically. Richard Causeway was an artist. So sort of suddenly then getting these kind of like moments in the research where you're like, actually, these people really did, you know, live in the same spaces. And therefore, actually, this isn't really that much of a reach to bring all of these people together in these stories. That was actually really exciting for me. And obviously, you know, the conversations and the events in these books are all imagined, but there's lots of real life research that's sort of gone into the sort of background of the book. And after a while, I did find this place where it just felt like I won't say like a marriage made in heaven, but it just kind of felt like it really worked. It really worked in the end for me, I think.
That's so exciting. When you're saying that, I've got goosebumps because I'm like, oh, I bet they were actually best buddies.
Yeah, it's really strange. It's really, you know, it is amazing. And when you're working with that archival material, it's full of those experiences. You know, that's what I'm looking at in my PhD research. What it's like is literally about the kind of responses, really visceral responses you have when you're reading these letters and suddenly making these connections and feeling, because it's a powerful thing to see someone's handwriting from that time, or to sort of come face to face with a painting, or, you know, see even like Dido's baptism record. You know, there's something about those moments where you feel you are just for a minute kind of really having a point of contact with the past.
Yeah. So to round us off, I'm going to do our magic 3, as I know I've run over a teeny tiny bit. So
Sorry.
Our first question of our magic 3 is, what 3 things can you not sit down to write without?
Okay, so I mean, I'm crazy about pens. You know, and I say that because I handwrite everything first, really. So all my writing, I've got notebooks basically, and then I type them up, and then I sort of, you know, print and sort of, you know, scribble onto the typed bits of paper. But the Lizzie and Belle books are all in like ring bound A4 notebooks, so I need a good pen. And at the moment I love working with I've got a little fountain pen. I'm going to show you. This is a tiny like Parker fountain pen that's really light, found again after a few years, and I love it. So a really good pen, a cup of tea. I'm just mad for tea. I'm really into Kenyan tea. I used to do a lot of running, and I read a brilliant book called Running with the Kenyans, and the amazing Kenyan runners. I mean, obviously this isn't the only secret of their running, but they used to drink a lot of strong Kenyan tea, and I convinced myself if I drank enough strong Kenyan tea, I could run really fast. So a cup of tea, Kenyan tea, a beautiful fountain pen, and I guess a notebook. You know, I really do love a notebook, and I take those out with me. So I take notebooks and pens out in my handbags and my bags whenever I go out. I don't drive, so I walk, I travel on the bus and the tube, and I'm always thinking, what if the tube gets stuck in a tunnel and I haven't got a notebook and pen?
I'm the same.
Right.
I'm exactly the same. Those are good. A pen, a notebook, and some strong Kenyan tea.
Yeah.
Our second magic 3 question is, what was your favorite book as a child? And I'll say a young child before the age of 12, because that's like the age bracket of your book. So before 12, what was your favorite?
Okay. So I think so the book I'm thinking of, I think I could just get it in there because I genuinely think that I bought it when I was about 11. But I'm going to say The Friends by Rosa Guy. And there, you know how it is, and there are lots of books that I loved reading as a child, but I do mention The Friends because I do think that actually there's a way in which The Friends was a real influence for me when I was thinking about Lizzie and Belle as well. And for me, it was the first time that I'd ever seen Black girls on the cover of a book as well. So even though, these girls live in New York in the 1970s, their life experiences are very different to mine in many ways. But there was, again, that kind of, magical moment of recognition when I saw those girls on the front of that book cover. And I actually lost my original copy, but I've bought 2 copies since.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case. They've both got different covers, and I just don't want to take any risks now. So, yeah.
Love that. I can't lie, I'm a sucker for stuff like that. If I see a new version or like a nice cover when you take off the front, if it's one of those, I'll buy it for buying its sake.
Yeah,
Totally. And then our final question is a finish off the sentence.
Ooh.
The sentence is, Black books matter because ...
Black books matter because Black people matter. I'm just going to leave it there. I'm just going to leave it there. Yeah, we need to see our own experiences in print, right? And Black books matter because it's important for us to see ourselves reflected in the books that we read. Yeah. So 2 kind of answers there, but I hope you know what I mean. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much for giving up your time today and speaking with us. Really, really,
What a pleasure.